Why don't we invite him? It'll be funny. That one sentence, spoken by Jason, the self-proclaimed leader of the wealthy, arrogant clique, was enough to set the tone for everything that followed. His voice carried across the school's parent lounge, casual and careless, yet laced with cruelty. The other parents, those who orbited around Jason like moths to a flame, burst into laughter, nodding in agreement, already imagining the scene in their heads. They weren't planning an act of kindness. No, they were planning entertainment. And their target? Malik. Malik wasn't like them. He didn't glide into school in a polished luxury car with tinted windows and leather seats. He didn't wear tailored suits or gold watches. He wasn't the type to lean against marble counters while sipping imported coffee, talking about business ventures or vacation homes. Instead, Malik showed up in his dusty construction boots, often with flecks of cement still clinging to his jeans. His shirt was sometimes wrinkled, his hands calloused, and his face carried the tired but steady look of a man who worked hard every single day to provide for his daughter. He was a single father, raising Amara on his own after tragedy had left him a family of 2. And yet, despite everything, there was a quiet dignity about him. Malik never seemed ashamed of who he was. If anything, he walked with subtle pride, the kind that comes from honest work and knowing you've earned every cent in your pocket. But to people like Jason and his friends, pride wasn't measured in sweat or sacrifice. It was measured in brand labels, expensive champagne, and social status. That was why Malik became their chosen target. Jason had decided to host a fancy parents' dinner at his sprawling mansion, a night filled with chandeliers, catered meals, and self-congratulations. But what's a performance without someone to laugh at? That's where Malik came in. Can you imagine him walking into my house with those dusty boots? Jason chuckled. The group roared with laughter. He'll probably bring his lunchbox, too, another parent sneered. Or ask if he can fix something while he's there, someone else added. The cruelty rolled on like a wave. What they didn't know was that just a few steps away, Amara was sitting alone, waiting for her dad to finish signing her school documents. She was bright, one of the top students in her class, and more observant than the adults gave her credit for. As she sat quietly, her small hands clutching her notebook, she heard every word. Her chest tightened. Her father, her hero, was being laughed at, not because he was unkind, not because he'd ever done anything wrong, but because he didn't shine the way they thought he should. That night, as Malik tucked her into bed, Amara couldn't hold it in anymore. Her big brown eyes shimmered with tears as she whispered, "Daddy, they only invited you to laugh at you. I heard them. They think you don't belong." For a moment, silence filled the room. Malik sat on the edge of her bed, his rough hands resting gently over hers. He could see the fear in her eyes, the doubt slowly creeping into her innocent heart. But Malik was no stranger to mockery. He had heard whispers before, felt the stares, sensed the judgment, and he knew the world wouldn't always be kind to him or to his daughter. Instead of letting anger rise, he smiled, a soft, reassuring smile that held both strength and peace. "Let them laugh, baby," he said quietly. "Truth always reveals itself." Amara frowned. "But Daddy, doesn't it hurt?" Malik nodded slowly. "It does. But you see, their laughter doesn't define me. What matters is who we really are, not what they say about us. I've built everything we have with these hands." He held them up, showing her the calluses, the marks of labor, the proof of his struggle. "And I'll never be ashamed of that. One day they'll see. Maybe not now, but they will." His words settled in her little heart, but the pain didn't fully fade. She wanted to believe him. She always believed her father, but she also feared the cruelty of the world outside their small, loving home. The next day, Malik confirmed he would attend Jason's dinner, not with anger, not with the desire to prove anyone wrong, but because he had nothing to hide. He wasn't going to change his shoes or buy a new suit just to fit in. He would walk in exactly as he was, a man who worked hard, loved deeply, and lived honestly. And Amara, watching him prepare, realized something important. Her father wasn't just attending a dinner. He was teaching her a lesson about dignity, about courage, and about holding your head high even when others try to drag you down. What Jason and his friends thought would be a joke was about to become the beginning of a story they'd never forget. The night of Jason's grand dinner arrived, and it was everything he had promised. His mansion, perched on a hill, glowed like a palace in the night. Golden light poured out of tall windows, and the long driveway was lined with polished luxury cars, sleek black sedans, shiny sports cars, even a few with vanity plates that boasted about wealth and power. Valets in neat uniforms rushed to open doors, while waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of champagne glasses that sparkled under the chandelier glow. Soft classical music drifted through the air, carefully chosen to set the tone of sophistication. Guests, dripping in designer clothes and jewelry, floated into the house like they were walking a runway. And then came Malik. He didn't arrive in a car that purred like a panther. He didn't step out with polished leather shoes or silk ties. Instead, his old sedan, paint slightly chipped, engine humming a little too loud, pulled up among the luxury cars, sticking out like a sore thumb. Some of the parents near the entrance noticed immediately. "Whose car is that?" One woman whispered with a smirk. "Looks like the delivery guy got lost." Another chuckled. But when Malik stepped out, dressed in a simple, well-kept but modest suit, holding Amara's small hand in his, the laughter became sharper. Their eyes scanned him from head to toe, and though they wore smiles, the judgment was clear. Inside the mansion, the glittering chandeliers reflected off crystal glasses and polished marble floors. Jason, standing tall with his usual smug grin, noticed Malik enter and leaned back in satisfaction. This was exactly what he had planned. The contrast, the awkwardness, the entertainment. For a brief second, the room went quiet as Malik walked in. His presence was unexpected, his calmness disarming. But the silence quickly broke into whispers. "Did he rent that car just for tonight?" a woman murmured, her diamond earrings swaying as she laughed. "Or maybe he borrowed that suit from a thrift store," another added, covering her mouth as though the cruel joke would sound softer that way. Malik heard every word. He wasn't deaf, and he wasn't blind to the way eyes followed him, scanning, mocking. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he adjusted his suit gently, gave a small smile, and tightened his hold on Amara's hand. "Daddy," Amara whispered, her little voice trembling. "They're laughing at you." Malik bent down just slightly, enough for her to hear him without anyone else noticing. His voice was steady, warm, and filled with reassurance. "Let them, baby. We walk with our heads high." Guided by that quiet dignity, Malik stepped further inside, as though he belonged there as much as anyone else. Dinner was served in a grand dining room with ceilings so high they seemed to disappear into the shadows. The table stretched long, covered in white linen, decorated with glittering candelabras and vases of fresh roses. Plates of food arrived like art pieces, tiny portions placed delicately in the center of oversized dishes. As the guests settled in, the conversation became a parade of pride. One man bragged about his newly purchased yacht, casually describing its size as if it were another family member. Another parent spoke with pride about his stock investments, boasting about how much he made while sleeping. Others joined in, tossing names of vacation spots, luxury brands, and political connections around like confetti. Jason, seated at the head of the table, thrived in this environment. His smirk grew with every story, every boast, every cheer of approval. And then, as if he'd been waiting for the perfect moment, he leaned forward and looked directly at Malik. "So, Malik," Jason said, his voice loud enough for the whole table to hear, "what about you? What do you do these days? Still fixing pipes and hammering nails?" The table exploded in laughter. Forks clinked against plates as some covered their mouths. Others shook their heads, and a few even wiped tears of laughter from their eyes. The cruelty wasn't hidden. It was celebrated. Amara's small hand gripped her father's under the table, her tiny fingers trembling. Her eyes burned with tears that she tried so hard not to let fall. She wanted to scream, to tell them to stop, to make them see who her father truly was. But Malik didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam his fist against the table. He didn't shrink, either. Instead, he looked straight at Jason, his expression calm, his voice steady. "Yes," Malik said simply with a small smile. "I build things." The table chuckled again, some shaking their heads, others muttering jokes under their breath. But Malik wasn't done. "I also build futures," he continued, his words deliberate, his gaze unwavering. The laughter slowed for a second. A few faces frowned, confused. "What's that supposed to mean?" one man muttered. Jason rolled his eyes dramatically, waving a dismissive hand as though Malik's words were nothing but poetic nonsense. But Amara understood. Her father wasn't just talking about construction. He was talking about her, about the life he was building for her brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. He was talking about how his sweat, his callous hands, and his endless determination were laying the foundation for something greater than wealth, a future for his daughter that no amount of mockery could take away. Amara squeezed his hand tighter, not out of fear this time, but out of pride. Her father hadn't bowed his head. He hadn't let their laughter win. He stood tall, and in that moment, she realized he was stronger than all of them combined. The others, too blinded by their arrogance, didn't see it. They only rolled their eyes and returned to their bragging, brushing Malik's words aside like crumbs from the table. But the seeds of truth had been planted, and soon they would grow into a reality that none of them were prepared to face. Dinner was served, and though the plates were filled with delicate, expensive dishes, the air at the table was far from tasteful. Between bites of caviar and sips of champagne, the mocking didn't stop. It was subtle at times, a smirk, a raised eyebrow, a chuckle behind a napkin. But at other times, it was bold and cruel, like daggers wrapped in laughter. Jason, as always, was the ringleader. He enjoyed the performance, the way the group fed off his energy, like hyenas circling their prey. Lifting his glass of wine with exaggerated elegance, he stood, flashing a grin that was more smirk than smile. "To hard work," he declared, his voice booming through the hall. "Some of us work with numbers," he paused, raising his glass to a man who had just bragged about his hedge fund. The table applauded. "And some of us—" Jason's eyes slid deliberately toward Malik, who sat calmly, eating in silence. "Work with dirt." The room erupted in laughter. Glasses clinked together. Hands slapped the table, and sneers passed from one face to another like a contagious disease. Amara's cheeks burned. She couldn't bring herself to look up. She wished she could disappear under the table, shield her father from the cruelty. But when she dared to glance at him, Malik was not flustered. His posture remained steady, his eyes calm, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, Malik leaned forward, setting his fork down gently. His voice was low, but strong enough to cut through the laughter. "Funny thing about dirt," he said. The chuckles began to fade, curiosity pricking the edges of their amusement. "That's where foundations are laid," Malik continued. His eyes scanned the table, meeting the gaze of each parent one by one. "And without foundations, none of your mansions would stand." The room shifted. The air thickened. The laughter trailed off like smoke in the wind. For the first time that night, Malik's words carried weight they could not brush aside. There was power in his calmness, an unsettling strength in his refusal to bow. Jason, however, wasn't ready to surrender his stage. He leaned back, pretending to chuckle, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. He lifted his glass again, forcing a smirk. "All right then, Malik," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "If you're so proud of your dirt, tell us this. How much is your little construction hustle worth? $100? Maybe 200 if you throw in some spare nails." The table howled once again, but this time Malik didn't let the sound linger. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving into a soft chuckle. It wasn't forced nor bitter. It was the kind of laugh that carried confidence, the kind that comes from a man who knows something everyone else doesn't. "No," Malik said simply, his voice calm, almost gentle. "More like 100 million. The effect was immediate. The table froze. Glasses paused midair. Forks clattered against plates. The roar of laughter collapsed into stunned silence. Eyes widened, heads turned, jaws slackened. Jason blinked, his face paling. What did you say?" His voice cracked, the confidence evaporating from his tone. Malik reached into his pocket with deliberate ease and pulled out his phone. Unlocking it, he scrolled for just a second before turning the screen outward for all to see. His movements were steady, controlled, like a man who had been patient long enough and finally chose the right moment to speak. The parents leaned in, curiosity overtaking their smugness. On the screen was an article from a well-known business news site. The headline, bold and unmistakable, lit up the room like a thunderclap. Local construction firm owner Malik Johnson signs $100 million deal for luxury development project. Gasps echoed around the table. A fork slipped from a woman's trembling fingers, clattering loudly against her plate. Another parent's eyes darted from the phone to Malik's face, as if hoping it was some cruel joke. But it wasn't. The truth was right there, undeniable and humiliating. The man they had mocked for wearing dusty boots, the man they had laughed at for his dirt, was sitting at the table with more power and wealth than most of them combined. Jason's jaw hung open. His smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow gape of disbelief. This can't be real, he stammered. But even as he spoke, he knew it was. The evidence glared back at him from Malik's phone, and the silence of the room sealed his defeat. Malik slid his phone back into his pocket with the same calmness he had carried all night. He didn't puff his chest. He didn't boast. He didn't need to. Instead, he picked up his fork again and resumed eating, as though nothing had happened. Around him, the parents sat in stunned silence, their laughter now ashes in their throats. The chandeliers still sparkled above, the roses still perfumed the air, but the atmosphere had shifted entirely. The grandeur of Jason's mansion suddenly felt small, fragile, hollow. Amara, sitting beside her father, finally allowed herself to smile. It wasn't just pride she felt, it was awe. The man who walked in with quiet dignity had just revealed a truth so powerful that it silenced an entire room of arrogance. Her father hadn't needed to shout or fight to win. He simply let the truth speak for itself. And in that moment, Amara understood her father's words better than ever. Truth always reveals itself. The room had been silenced by Malik's revelation, but silence doesn't erase guilt. It lingers, it burns, and it forces people to scramble for excuses. And so, the same mouths that had spent the night tearing Malik down suddenly twisted into fake smiles, desperate to cover their shame. Oh, Malik, I think I read about that, one mother stammered, her voice trembling as she waved her hand like the memory had just dawned on her. Yes, I remember now. You were in the paper, weren't you? Another parent leaned forward, forcing a laugh. Of course. I knew you looked familiar the moment you walked in. Just didn't place it until now. The shift was obvious. Their laughter had evaporated, replaced by shaky voices and nervous glances. The very people who had mocked his dusty boots were now tripping over themselves to claim they had always known. Jason, though, wasn't one to surrender easily. His cheeks flushed, his jaw tightened, and then he forced a loud laugh that echoed unnaturally through the dining room. He clapped Malik on the back like they were old friends. Well, we were just joking, man, Jason said, grinning too wide. Come on, don't take it seriously. We like to mess around, you know? You should have told us sooner. You could have spared us the surprise. The others chuckled nervously, nodding like puppets, hoping Malik would laugh it off and everything would return to normal. But Malik didn't laugh. For the first time that night, his expression hardened. The calm dignity he had carried shifted into something sharper, still composed, but firm, immovable, undeniable. His voice, steady as steel, broke through the false laughter. No, the word cut through the air like glass shattering. The fake smiles faltered. The chuckles died instantly. Every eye turned to him. Malik set his glass down with precision, his gaze sweeping across the table. You didn't invite me to celebrate. You invited me to mock me. Let's not pretend otherwise. From the moment I walked in, you whispered, you laughed, you measured me by my shoes, by my car, by the dirt on my hands. No one dared to move. The chandeliers above glittered, casting light on faces that now looked pale, guilty, exposed. You saw a single black father and assumed less than... Malik continued, his voice rising, not in anger but in truth. You assumed struggle meant failure. You assumed hard work meant weakness. But while you were busy laughing, he paused, his hand resting over Amara's small one, I was busy working, building, creating. And now, my work speaks louder than your insults ever could. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Some guests looked down at their plates, unable to meet his eyes. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, the shame crawling across their faces like a shadow they couldn't escape. Amara, who had spent the night shrinking under their mockery, now looked up at her father with wide, shining eyes. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, one filled with pride, admiration, and relief. In that moment, he wasn't just her dad. He was her hero. Jason tried to speak, his arrogance crumbling. "Malik, look, But Malik stood, tall and unyielding, cutting him off without a single word. He didn't need to argue. He didn't need to shout. His dignity had already spoken louder than Jason's entire performance. He reached for Amara's hand, his grip gentle yet firm. "Come on, baby," he said softly. But his words carried through the room like command. "We don't need to sit at a table that doesn't respect us." The scrape of his chair against the polished floor echoed like thunder in the silent dining hall. Together, father and daughter walked toward the door. Their steps weren't hurried nor ashamed. They were deliberate, strong, and proud. Each step Malik took left the others sinking deeper into their own shame. They watched him go, but no one dared stop him. No one dared say another word. Jason's smirk was gone. His mansion, his chandeliers, his stage dinner, all of it suddenly felt hollow. He had invited Malik to be the evening's joke. But Malik had walked out as the only man in the room who truly carried power. The large doors of the mansion swung open, and Malik and Amara stepped into the cool night air. For Amara, it felt like breathing for the first time all evening. She held her father's hand tightly, her heart swelling with pride. Inside, the so-called elite sat frozen in their seats, left with nothing but the echo of Malik's words and the bitter taste of their own arrogance. And in that silence, one truth lingered, undeniable and unshakable. Respect is not begged for, it's earned. Malik hadn't just defended himself. He had redefined the meaning of success in front of those who thought they owned it. The next morning, the sun rose over the school just as it always did, casting golden light across the playground and parking lot. But something was different. Something had shifted in the air. Jason arrived first. He stepped out of his luxury SUV, his sunglasses doing little to hide the dark circles under his eyes. He hadn't slept much. The party that was supposed to make him the center of attention had backfired in the worst way. Instead of waking up to admiration, he woke up to humiliation. His phone buzzed nonstop all night and into the morning, not with congratulations, not with praise, but with messages from the same people who had been at his dinner. "Did you hear about Malik? He's worth $100 million. I can't believe we laughed at him. Jason invited him just to mock him. Can you imagine?" The group chat wasn't about Jason's chandeliers or his expensive wine. It wasn't about his mansion, his party, or his carefully staged show of wealth. The only name on everyone's lips was Malik. Jason felt small. His smirk, his arrogance, the image he worked so hard to maintain, it all seemed paper-thin now, like a costume ripped off under a harsh spotlight. No one was laughing with him anymore. Meanwhile, Malik's morning looked the same as it always did. He woke up early, fixed breakfast for Amara, and helped her pack her bag, then dressed in his usual work clothes, boots a little dusty, shirt a little faded. He drove her to school in the same old sedan. There was no entourage, no need for display, no need to prove himself. He didn't care if the world knew about his $100 million deal or not. He wasn't chasing validation. He was simply being the man he had always been, a father with a purpose. As he pulled into the school lot, Malik noticed the difference immediately. The whispers were gone. The side glances had changed. Where there was once smirking and mockery, there was now silence, heavy, uneasy silence. Parents who had laughed at him just days before now averted their eyes, their cheeks flushed with guilt. Some looked at him with respect, others with shame, but none dared to laugh. Amara held his hand tightly as they walked toward the entrance. Her small steps were quick, almost bouncing, but her eyes were searching, noticing the way people looked at her dad now. She felt taller somehow, prouder, like she was walking beside a giant the world had finally been forced to see. When they reached the school doors, Amara stopped, She tugged gently on her father's hand, her eyes brimming with emotion. She leaned closer, her voice soft but steady. "Daddy," she whispered, "last night you were the richest man in the room, not because of money, but because of how you carried yourself." Malik's heart swelled at her words. He crouched down so he was at level with her, brushing a curl from her forehead. He kissed her gently, his smile calm, warm, and filled with pride. "That's the only wealth that really matters," he replied. Amara beamed, her little arms wrapping around his neck in a tight hug before she ran inside, her backpack bouncing with each step. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. She knew her father was watching, standing tall, just as he always did. Malik remained by the doors for a moment, his hands resting on his hips as he watched her go. He felt no need to linger, no need to prove anything to the parents who now stared at him in silence. His point had been made without fanfare, without shouting. His life, his work, his dignity, they had spoken louder than anything else. Behind him, Jason stood at a distance, watching. His shoulders slumped, his pride shattered. He had invited Malik to humiliate him. But in the end, Jason had humiliated himself. He had built his identity on arrogance and material things, and Malik had dismantled it with nothing more than truth, humility, and quiet strength. The lesson was clear, written on every guilty face in that parking lot. You never judge a book by its cover. You never measure a man by his shoes, his car, or the dirt on his hands. And you never underestimate a single dad with a purpose, because true wealth isn't always visible. Sometimes it looks like dusty boots, tired eyes, and calloused hands. Sometimes it drives an old car and wears a simple suit. But when that wealth speaks, it silences every room. And from that day on, no one at the school looked at Malik the same way again. He hadn't just earned respect. He had redefined it,